said there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. Yes, the idea of freedom, liberty, and justice for all. Yes, that was the idea. But I declare that now is the time. And if America is going to have a chance at living out the true meaning of its creed, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, then we cannot afford for this nation or its leaders to have selective ambition.
Welcome to the Policy Lowdown, the podcast from the Maryland Center on Economic Policy, offering straight talk on the policies that matter most to Maryland communities. I'm your host, Kevin Slayton. As we've talked about on the show in past episodes, Maryland has a tax system that favors the wealthy and powerful special interest. And as a result, about 1/3 of the largest corporations that are doing business in Maryland pay zero income taxes in a typical year, giving them an extra advantage over the small Maryland-based businesses that tend to pay taxes and contribute to their communities. And when it comes to taxes that we all pay, our tax system seems to be upside down. For some reason, the wealthiest 1% of Marylanders pay a smaller share of their income in state and local taxes than anyone else. So if you're interested in some more background on this topic, you can go back to episode one we entitled A Budget as a Moral Document, and also you can visit our bonus episode at the end of the first season, A Roadmap for Tax Justice. Now, the state is also facing some long-term fiscal challenges, approximately $761 million deficit in the coming year. And without additional revenue, Governor Moore and the legislature will have to consider cuts to public services, and it will be very difficult to launch new programs or expand upon services to meet the needs that so many of our families have. I want to thank our two guests today for being with me and joining me for this conversation, where we talk about some of the major needs facing the state and what we can do to create a more equitable and just tax system. First, we have my dear friend Denise Gilmore. Denise is the legislative director for the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. We call it AFSCME, Maryland Council 3, the union representing the majority of state employees here in Maryland. Welcome, Denise.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm also excited to welcome Shamoya Gardner. She's no newbie to this. She's been here before on previous shows. Shamoya is the executive director of Strong Schools Maryland, which is a grassroots organization advocating for equitable funding and equitable student outcomes in Maryland schools. Thank you for joining us, Shamoya.
It is an absolute pleasure to be here with you both.
Yes, I would love it if you could each share a bit more about yourselves and your organization. Let's start with you, Denise. What should our listeners know about AFSCME, and also how you can sort of came to this work?
Sure. So we are the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Nationally, we represent 1.4 million public sector workers. Here in the state of Maryland, we had an exciting summer. We unified with our sister council and now represent 45,000 state, county, and municipal employees across Maryland. As the legislative director, I advocate for policies that promote good, conditions for working families here in the state.
And Shamoya, tell us a bit more about yourself and Strong Schools Maryland.
Happy to. So I actually come to this work from the once upon a time, maybe great state of Florida, where I was a secondary science teacher in Jacksonville for several years. And ultimately, all of the policy work that I do is driven by the vision that I had for my students, which is that they defy statistics and have the lives that they chose to. I was very fortunate to join the Strong Schools Maryland team back in 2020, but I actually have a longer history of working with the organization. And so Strong Schools Maryland has been around since 2017. It was actually established in response to the formation of the Kirwan Commission. At our outset, our goal was to make sure that the recommendations were passed and fully funded. And now that the Blueprint for Maryland's Future is law, we are here to ensure the faithful implementation and, of course, full funding of that law.
Well, as you both know, we asked you here today because both of you are able to speak more specifically about some of those major needs and concerns that the state is facing, as well as the potential consequences of the state not having enough money to meet some of those needs. To start with a little background, Shamoya, what is the blueprint for Maryland? People hear this all the time, but what is the blueprint for Maryland's future, and why is it important for students here in Maryland?
Absolutely. So in short, because the blueprint is a rather long document, several hundred pages, the blueprint is how Maryland intends to create a world-class system of public schools in the state. And what this means is that we have to have a shift in the paradigm of how we view public education. The experiences that students currently in our schools are facing are nothing like what I faced as a student, nothing like what my grandparents faced, and frankly, the blueprint recognizes those changes. And so the law focuses on 5 key policy areas. We start with early childhood education, because of course, beginning early is the best way to ensure that students are on track for success. But we're also focused on increasing the quality and diversity. We're talking racial diversity of our teachers and school leaders. The law creates new college and career readiness pathways to ensure that in the 21st century, you don't have to go to college in order to have a good life and access to a job that pays you quality, family-sustaining wages. The law also focuses on equity through Pillar 4, which is more resources to ensure that all students succeed, and that all is a battle we continue to fight. And ultimately, the multi-billion-dollar investment that is the blueprint is wrapped up in governance and accountability systems to ensure both faithful implementation, but also the success of the law itself.
Well, Denise, people don't always think about the work that goes into delivering, as Heather McGee says, the stuff, the public services, that we give. Why should anyone even care how Marylanders workforce, the folks who are doing that work? Why should we care? And why is that even important? What are some of the challenges that state workers are facing now?
From the moment that you are born until, you eventually die, you are in contact with our public infrastructure. If it's from getting your birth certificate to going through schools, as my sister Shamoya just said, to, being able to drive to work on highways that are clean and safe and maintained, to public safety, to public health, to when you buy a house, needing to get, titles and permits and everything together. All of those things are accomplished through state employees, public employees who, have a job to meet the needs and for Marylanders. And when we are understaffed and under-resourced, all Marylanders feel it. It is critically important that we have a robust workforce that can meet the demands for the services that they need to provide, that they are well trained, that they are experienced. Nobody wants to go into an MVA and, talk to someone who, this is their first day and may not know, have that full training.
I think that's another show.
We all want to be able to, reach the state and, and be able to get the answers and the services that we need. And so having a workforce that is skilled is important. And, we really, there are lots of opportunities for the state to also, bring in revenue if we have the staff that we need to properly, meet those needs. So, it's hard to avoid a public employee in your everyday life, and just think about, how different things would be if, there wasn't an entity there that is doing things like, monitoring, regulating your water, making sure that, kids can get to school safely. These are all things that state employees help with, and, we certainly think they're critical and deserve to have the investment needed to make sure that all Marylanders can thrive.
My youngest daughter has this thing she likes to say. She says, "Dad, you had one job to do. You couldn't do your one job." I mean, she drives that home. If there's one job that the legislature has to do in the 90 days, it is what? Balance the budget. And so Maryland has a history of balancing the budget, particularly in years following the Great Recession. They cut back on spending for schools often, freezing employee pay or even holding some positions vacant. In this moment where the state is going to be facing some of these types of choices once again, Can you both talk about why it's important not to go down this road again? We'll start with you, Shamoy.
Definitely. One, I'm glad that you referenced the great Heather McGhee in your earlier comments. We cannot afford to go down this road before, and the road that I'm talking about is the one where we don't acknowledge the interconnectedness of us all. The cuts that were made around 2008 when the Great Recession occurred, the cuts that were made to education ultimately hampered the implementation of the Bridge to Excellence Act of 2002. That law was based on recommendations from the Thornton Commission, chaired by Dr. Alvin Thornton, who's a giant in the education space. And ultimately, the legislature's decision to separate the education funding formula from the growth pace of inflation resulted in the situation we found ourselves in 2017, where Maryland schools were underfunded by an average of $2 million per school per year. And in places with high concentrations of poverty and Black and brown folks, like in Baltimore City, Prince George's County, and over on the Eastern Shore, in places like Caroline and Somerset County, we saw those discrepancies in that underfunding be disproportionately borne by our children. It cannot happen again. For leaders, any leader in 2024 to say, we can fix our budgetary issues by making cuts to key services that we all rely on, key services that do things like uphold the institution of democracy, is a fallacy. That would mean that those leaders have not learned from the lessons of the very recent past. And what we need is leadership that recognizes that there is a paradigm shift afoot, that we are not balancing our budgets on the backs of our children and our educators, our future, ultimately, but instead we need to make the pie larger. So it's worth noting that in 2017, more than half of Black students in the state of Maryland attended a school that was substantially underfunded, or in a district that was substantially underfunded as compared to just 13% of white students. Why is this important? Today, the students who are served by Maryland's public education systems, all 25 of them technically if we include the seed school, 70% of our students are of color. And if we are not serving them well, if we are not creating the conditions for their success, we are dooming ourselves in the future.
It's a major point to think about, particularly as we head into recognition of the life of Dr. Martin King, as well as Black History Month. Race seems to always be at the center of our budget and our policy conversations. But again, we don't want to go down this road again. Denise, what would you say?
Yeah, it's a very similar story with state services. Going back to the Great Recession, we had to pursue large cuts to the agencies. During that period, state employees gave back about $5 billion worth of pay and benefits to help balance the budget. We enter 2014, and we unfortunately elected a governor that wasn't pro-public service, wasn't pro-public employee, and, continued these austerity measures, didn't hire, continued with position cuts and service cuts. And when the Moore administration took over, they truly inherited a government that was at skeleton crews in almost every agency. Between the number of vacancies and then the positions that were needed but haven't been added to the budget, there's a deficit of about 10,000 positions. That affects, again, I'm not going to go through, all of the list of areas where, folks are impacted by state services, but just to give a few examples, yearly we are spending, over $160 million on overtime in the Department of Corrections because we're not, properly hiring staff. That's almost 15% of the total DPSCS budget. It means that individuals are on long waiting lists to get services. Right now, over in the Department of Rehabilitation Services and the, Maryland State Department of Education, there are over 2,000 individuals on a wait list for their, SSI benefits, right? So if you're, in a disabling car accident and can no longer work, we all pay out of our paychecks, right, for these Social Security benefits, but you've got to meet eligibility requirements first. When we don't have enough caseworkers to do that job, it means that we have large caseloads. I mean, it's truly tragic listening to stories of our members who have clients that are dying while they're on these wait lists. We've got the same story in the Department of Health, where we're getting, 4,000 applications for placements into what is ultimately 96 staffed beds. And so, it impacts services. I want to really, our members enter this work, out of a spirit of public service. Nobody expects to get rich doing this work. And it can really hurt when you can't fulfill that mission because you simply don't have enough resources to do it. Pay is obviously an issue. I mean, that's a big part of why the state is struggling with staffing right now. This is happening nationally, but the public sector, needs to keep up with the private sector on maintaining competitive wages. And so that's a large piece of this. We've got to increase wages. Our jobs just aren't, competitive with a lot of federal sector jobs, jobs in the counties in some instances, surrounding states. So pay is a part of this, and, we need to really do a good assessment of where we need to add positions to. We've seen, departments like the Department of Labor see 20% of their positions cut over the last 15 years. That sort of thing really hurts us when we're trying to, reach a crisis and have, Marylanders out of work because of a pandemic, not able to access those unemployment benefits, right? All of these things are connected, and, we truly need a big investment to right the ship.
I hear Dr. King loud and clear saying and reminding us that, budgets are truly moral documents. It says so much about who we are. Fiscal challenges are nothing new for the state of Maryland. It's very common that we face these, and you think we would have learned a little more having gone through this, repeatedly. But organizations such as yours are advocating for a different path. Many have come to the table with the Fair Funding Coalition. And so I want to ask you, Shamoya, in particular, can you talk about what this Fair Share Maryland plan is, and why organizations that work for, these different interests, why they're supporting it?
Happily. The Fair Share for Maryland plan would create a fairer tax system, deliver tax cuts to help children in poverty, and raise revenue, the very same revenue that the state needs to build a Maryland that works for everyone. It would raise about $1.7 billion, yes, that's billion with a B, dollars per year when fully phased in, by closing those corporate tax loopholes and ensuring that the wealthy pay their fair share in income taxes. The Fair Share for Maryland plan would also expand the state's child tax credit, which gives refundable tax credits to low and moderate income parents with incomes up to about $100,000 per year. The tax credits are worth about $750 per child for children 5 and under, and $500 for older children, and gradually phase out at higher income levels to make sure that we're equitably using our resources. This plan is designed to avoid, as much as is possible, raising taxes on anyone earning less than $250,000 per year. It would also advance economic and racial justice by addressing the aspects of our state's tax system that disproportionately benefit wealthy white households at the explicit expense of Marylanders of color. Strong Schools Maryland has a long history of collaborating with the Fair Funding Coalition, even prior to the blueprint existing, when it was just the recommendations of the Kirwan Commission. We knew that funding was going to have to follow those recommendations in order for our students and school communities to receive the world-class investments they deserve. And so we know that reducing childhood poverty has impacts on education overall. Under the blueprint, we had to create an entirely new concentration of poverty grant program to expand our community school strategy and ensure that community connections were made and investments are happening at the local level to support students and school communities. However, if the Fair Share for Maryland plan passes the legislature and this child tax credit provision is implemented, what we will be doing is addressing the impacts of poverty on education further upstream before our students get to school, and hopefully giving them that much more of a strong foundation to succeed when they walk through those classroom doors.
And for your folks that asked me, why are they supporting this plan?
Well, for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, it would raise, the revenue needed to help restaff and improve our state government. It does it, more importantly, in an equitable way. The average salaries for the members that we represent across state government are, below $60,000, certainly. Those are, it's incredibly different. I don't have to tell anybody here, but it's incredibly difficult in this state to raise children off of a salary of, $53,000 a year. And we've recently moved, salaries up to 15. Still, that's, $32,000 a year. It's incredibly difficult to raise a family off of those salaries. So it would also help with, I know Chamoy just talked about the expanded child tax credit. Many public employees in the state are going to qualify for that. That's an investment in helping their economic stability and in the future too. So, we're big supporters of this plan.
We were fortunate to speak with Senate President Bill Ferguson on our last episode, for those who are listening. And he said he thinks that the focus this year during the session should be on cutting the budget in a way that it adjusts to existing revenues while growing our economy. What would you all have to say to him?
Look, Maryland is required to have a balanced budget, which, means that if spending is bigger than revenues we're taking in, there will need to be some tough cuts this year. I would implore our policymakers that we can't afford to cut state employees any further because at this point we've reached that point where that just creates higher overtime costs, longer waiting lists for services, and high caseloads. Those things ultimately cost the state more money. We also, really want to encourage policymakers to resist the temptation to privatize services, because in the long run, that's a costly decision too, and doesn't support the type of career jobs we need to grow our economy here in Maryland. I think at the end of the day, we want the administration and the legislature to listen and consult AFSCME members. Listen to our members who are on the front line. They have incredibly good ideas on how we can make the delivery of state services more efficient and save money. Make sure that any solutions that we're pursuing or changes actually work. And so we hope that we, are continuing to be, stakeholders and partners in these decisions because they deserve it. They are dedicated public servants who, have chosen this life over more lucrative careers, oftentimes in the public sector. And, there certainly is more that we can be doing to support them. And we just hope that their voice is included in, as we move forward in these discussions.
Mm-hmm. To our fearless leader, our great Senate president, who, like me, was also a classroom teacher, I would say don't fall victim to a scarcity mindset. Don't accept the notion that there is only so much money the state can have, and we have to cut the services that people need in order to meet the demands of something as arbitrary as a numerical figure. There is more that Maryland can be doing. You've already heard about the Fair Share for Maryland plan and how much it can bring to the budget. And this is just one set of options. And so to Senate President Ferguson, to all leaders, I will say, get rid of that scarcity mindset. Our economy is just about as good as what we invest into it. And so if we are investing in good schools, if we're investing in high quality public infrastructure, in transportation, in the things that raise the quality of life that Marylanders are experiencing, we can't lose. However, if we do decide to cut funding for schools and roads and transit systems and supportive services, we are going to end up in a significantly worse position than we saw ourselves in with the Great Recession. Because the lesson we learned then is that you do not cut people and expect to prosper. Instead, you invest in people, in their potential and capacity. There are other states across the nation, like Massachusetts and Minnesota, that are passing the very same or even more progressive, frankly, revenue generation measures. And it's allowing those states to make huge investments in their schools, their public transportation system, and those other services that we all require, even at a time when nationally things are a little uncertain. Maryland has the capacity to create the conditions for our state's residents to thrive. There is no reason not to work towards that.
As we wrap this episode up, I want to thank you both again for joining me for this conversation. But before we go, can you both share with our listeners how they can get involved in these efforts and support the Fair Share Maryland plan?
Sure. So, we're going to be very active. Our members are going to be very active in Annapolis, like we are every session. I think we bring down a horde of folks in green shirts on Monday nights, and they're going to be there again this session, fighting for, better state services, and that we're going to make the investments that we need through passing this revenue plan. Support your local public employee. I think it is really, really tough working under-resourced. It can be dangerous. Many public sector jobs are dangerous. And they deserve to have the investment needed to make sure that they are properly resourced at work and can stay safe and have the benefits after a long career to be able to retire with dignity someday. And I hope that folks recognize that in, their teacher and their school bus driver and the person that they're interacting with when they go to the MVA, right? These are, really important. And we'd certainly love to have folks, remind our policymakers that we've got to make sure that our state government isn't on the chopping block. We've been through that too much.
I dare say it's only fair. Shamoya, would you add anything?
Yes, a couple things. And so if you are interested in what you've heard about today, there's more details about the Fair Share for Maryland plan available. You can go to fairsharemaryland.org, and there you can also sign up for the coalition's email list to get notified about whatever events will be taking place this winter to support the Fair Share Maryland plan. You can also use that space as an opportunity to connect with your legislators to support the proposal. We're on social media, so feel free to find us there. And I would also say that as far as Strong Schools Maryland is concerned, we're active this session. We're growing. We've got a Blueprint Budget Workshop series going, in case you're curious about how to generate revenue at the local level and what the fiscal outlook is for your county. But ultimately, on February 12th, 2024, we'll be celebrating the 3-year anniversary of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future becoming law. So join us at 7 p.m. in Annapolis for a rally, a little bit of reflection, some coffee and hot chocolate, and a whole heck of a lot of fun with our entire network. You can find more information at strongschoolsmaryland.org.
AFSCME members will be there, Shamoya.
So I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to bundle up. I imagine it might be a little chilly, but I want to thank you both, Denise and Shamoya, for joining us on this episode. And I want to thank you all for listening. You can find podcast archives and resources from this episode at mdeconomy.org/policy-lowdown. And while you're there, you can sign up for our email list or support the Policy Lowdown by making a donation to the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. You can also find the Maryland Center on Economic Policy on your social media platforms at MD Economy on Twitter, Threads, and Instagram, and MD Economic Policy on Facebook. Thank you all for listening. See you next time.
Those that will stand up, call our nation back toward justice and righteousness are often bashed or labeled as socialist and unpatriotic. Many are labeled as instigators and rebel wild